morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a little bit of a look at Expedition. Now, this was a base set, a proper base set, the third one, if you count base set 2, that we'd ever seen in the Pokemon trading card game. It also marked the beginning of the end for Wizards of the Coast making the Pokemon trading card game. This was a base set for what would essentially be 3 sets, and then the Pokemon Company took it back over, and Wizards' time was done. That created some weird stuff in terms of this set and the couple that followed. So settle down, grab yourselves a nice cold beverage, and let's continue the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game. As usual, make sure you spam that like button. Let me know this series is needed. So, where do we start off with Expedition? Well, it was released in English, at least in the USA, on September the 15th, 2002, following a Japanese release, on December the 1st, 2001. It wouldn't actually see a European release until April 2003, quite a bit later. We'll get there in a minute. And at 165 cards, it was the biggest Pokemon set we'd had so far. But there was a very good reason for that. Now, these are referred to as the e-reader sets, we'll get there in a second, and the e-reader sets comprise Expedition, this set, followed by Aquapolis and Skyridge, 3 sets. But in Japan, they were 5 sets. Now, it was cut down to 3 sets to essentially shorten the gap between Japanese and English releases. By essentially skipping 2 sets, by taking 5 sets and making them into 3, we could shorten the release gap quite a bit, which led to gigantic sets. And one of the biggest changes that we saw here was the introduction of supporter cards. Now, we'd seen supporter cards before. We saw Professor Elm in a previous video, and Professor Elm was a phenomenal card. Shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 7 cards, but it was so good that it was a final trainer card you were allowed to play on your turn. You could draw 7 cards, but you couldn't play any that were trainers. Well, that was taken a step further here with the introduction of supporter cards. These were a subset of trainer cards, essentially, which you were limited to 1 during your turn. So something like Professor Elm's training method, as an example. I'll show you a bunch more in a minute. Search your deck for an evolution card, show it to your opponent, shuffle your deck, and that's it. Now, at the time, you could only play 1 each turn, and you put it next to your active Pokemon like it was actually supporting you, and then it was discarded at the end of your turn. In later years, it was changed so they got discarded when you played them. Now, you might see from that card that things look a little bit different. We've got what is generally referred to as dot code technology. We see it in the big fat borders. And that's why they're called e-reader cards, because these cards could actually be scanned through, you guessed it, an e-reader. And when you did that, you could do various things. According to the lovely folks at Bulbapedia, great site for research, I use it and you should too, you could view Pokedex entries for Pokemon, play mini-games, play special tunes, and also get a special attack for cards. Now, these were not legal in tournaments, by which I mean the attacks and the e-reader and all of that, partly because not everyone had an e-reader, and partly because electronic devices were not allowed. Now, the e-reader actually led to the set being delayed. It was supposed to be released in April 2002, it got delayed until September, so that we could actually get the e-reader. Except Europe never got the e-reader. In Europe, this set didn't come out until April 2002, a full 7 months after it was released in the US. And even then, we still didn't have the e-reader. We never actually got it, which is a little bit sad. Now, the other thing that happened, of course, if we look at this Machamp, which I'm going to mention a couple times, and we compare it to Giovanni's Machamp, on whom I did a deck very recently, you'll notice that something's missing. And what's missing is the Pokedex information. Superpower Pokemon, length 5'3", weight 287 pounds. That was all missing. We didn't have that. And although they weren't necessarily on the gym cards, if we have a look at other Machamps, let's take a look at, for instance, the base set Machamp, you can see that there's what we call flavor text. Using its amazing muscles, it throws powerful punches that can knock its victims clear over the horizon. A little bit of text that gives you more information about the Pokemon. That was all missing from the e-reader set, which they had to be in order to actually fit the border around, but then you got that information when you scan the card through the e-reader. Now this did actually cause humorous problems for Blaine's Quiz number 1, one of the gym cards, because Blaine's Quiz number 1 said you had to put a basic Pokemon or Evolution Pokemon card from your hand face down in front of you and tell your opponent its name. They had to guess the length of that Pokemon. If they guessed right, they drew 2 cards. If they guessed wrong, you draw 2 cards. And either way, the card went back to your hand. Pretty good. The problem is that these cards don't have the length written on them, which makes this card extremely difficult to actually play. Hey ho, ladies and gentlemen. Now, speaking of this .co technology, it did actually increase the cost of producing these cards because they had to pay a fee in order to actually have this technology available, so they reduced the number of cards in a pack from 10 down to 9. In these sets, you would get 5 common, 2 uncommon, 1 reverse holo, which could be any rarity, and a rare. Now, let's not talk about the fact that the .co tech was dropped in 2004, but we only went back to having 10 cards in a pack with Diamond and Pearl 3 years later in 2007. Some people might suggest something about that. I choose to steer clear. Maybe they just forgot. Now, one fun little fact that we did also get from Bulbapedia here, they were supposed to be called New Dimension, but the problem with calling it New Dimension was that that would have the initials ND. And we'd already had Neo Destiny and Neo Discovery. Do we really want a third set with the initials of ND? The answer is no. No, we don't. So we changed the name. Cool. And there was one other huge change we saw coming in with the Expedition base set, and that is that we took away Pokemon powers and we split them into Poké powers and Poké bodies. Now, Poké powers were things that you actually had to do. So if we take a look at Charizard's Burning Energy Poké power, once during your turn you may turn all basic energy attached to all of your Pokemon into fire for the rest of the turn. They weren't fire unless you chose to change them into fire using this Pokemon power. Poké bodies, however, were static things that were just always there. You wouldn't use them. There was no using them. They were just there. So take Tyranitar's Poké body Dark Aura. All energy attached to Tyranitar is darkness energy instead of its usual type. Any energy attached to Tyranitar is darkness, it's a Poké body, whereas energy attached to your Pokemon could be made fire with Charizard, but you would have to make it fire because, of course, it's a Poké power. There we go. Fairly big change. Now, for the second set, we did actually have box toppers here. These were, you'd buy a box and you'd get one of these as a little bit of a bonus, and you could have Alakazam, Feraligatr, Tyranitar, and Venusaur. And we do actually have a lovely picture of Venusaur here as a box topper. It's a jumbo card, so it's a fair bit bigger, and you can see how it actually differs in design and holo and all that from the regular cards. Now, in terms of the theme decks here, we did again have 2, and there were no holo cards in the theme decks, which I'm calling a little bit sad, quite frankly. We had Echo, and we had Electric Garden. Now, what was really cool about Echo is it was the first theme deck we'd ever had that actually had colourless as one of its main types. You can see on the box there, it's a psychic, colourless deck. And we got a couple of rares, though they were non-holos. We had an Alakazam, and we had a Clefable. The one really cool thing about this was that both of these theme decks actually had a random mirror reverse holo card, i.e. one of them was going to be a reverse holo, which is very cool. We see that same thing in Electric Garden, which is a grass lightning deck, And we saw rare versions of Vileplume, Weezing, and Raichu. So we actually had 3 rares in that, so I don't know, maybe that makes it the bestest. Who knows? Although that Weezing art was well grumpy, he does not look happy. I should mention the art on this set generally was absolutely phenomenal. Seriously, this was a great set for art, but you'll see this as we go through a few more cards. Now, when we start looking at the best cards in the set, we need a little bit of an appendix here. We need a little bit of an asterisk. It's not terribly fair. You see, Expedition came out in September 2002 in the US, April 2003 in Europe. We then had 2 more sets, Aquapolis and Skyridge, with Skyridge coming out May the 12th, 2003. But you see, then TPCI took over the game, the Pokemon Company International, although they weren't quite called that yet, and they dropped EX Ruby and Sapphire on the 18th of June 2003, which means we got a new full set. We got what was essentially the Ruby and Sapphire base set 5 weeks after Skyridge dropped, which meant that we didn't really have a huge amount of time to enjoy Skyridge and start bringing it all into the game before we brought in EX cards in EX Ruby and Sapphire. When the rotation hit in 2004, all of these sets were dropped, which means that most of these sets got like a year until they were gone. So they weren't out for very long, they weren't legal for very long. Not only that, but if we start comparing some of the cards, we see that actually a lot of the cards in this set were rather underpowered compared to the cards that came previously and the cards that came after. Which means that if you look at the standard format and the tournaments that were being played in, these cards didn't make a huge impact. I mean, if we look at some of the baby Pokemon here, right? I showed you Pichu previously, and I told you that Pichu was great. Pichu was great. Pichu, for a single colourless energy, did 20 damage to each Pokemon in play with a Pokemon power, and it had that rule whereby if you tried to attack it, you flip a coin. If tails, it didn't work. Which is nice. Now, the Pichu from Expedition actually did keep that same baby rule, but now for 1 lightning energy, you take a basic energy attached to one of your Pokemon and move it to another one. That's not even close. Magby from Neo Genesis, all Pokemon powers stop working until the end of your turn and you do 10 damage for 1 colourless energy. The Magby from Expedition, 1 fire energy, flip a coin. If heads, put a basic energy from your discard pile into your hand. That's not the same. We've talked over and over again about how great the Feraligatr was from Neo Genesis, and the Feraligatr from Neo Genesis has got the Pokemon power Downpour. You may discard a water energy from your hand as often as you like, and then for free water energy you do 10 damage base, plus 10 for each water energy in your discard pile, and then shuffle them back in. Phenomenal card. The Feraligatr from this set, well, it's got the Pokemon power Major Tsunami. If Feraligatr is your active and your opponent has any bench Pokemon, your opponent switches are active, and then you switch. It's a nice poker power, but it's not the same. And then 4 energy, 70 damage, but only 40 if there's any damage counters on the defending Pokemon. It might have been a couple years later, but no one's playing this Feraligatr over the old one. And then if we start looking into the future instead, we can look at something like the Blaziken from EX Ruby and Sapphire. Phenomenal card. Once during your turn, you may attach a fire energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then free energy, 50 damage, discard a fire, and then do 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench. Good attack, good ability. Whereas the Typhlosion from Expedition's got Heat Up. Once during your turn, before you attack, you may count the total number of energy cards attached to all of your Pokemon and all of your opponents. If they've got more energy cards attached, you can search your deck for 1 fire energy and attach it to a Pokemon. So you get it from the deck, but only if you've got fewer energy in play, which is nowhere near as good. And then 4 energy, 50 plus burn, as opposed to 3 energy, 50 and 10 to all of your opponent's bench. These sets were kind of underpowered compared to what came before, and kind of underpowered compared to what came after, and they really didn't see a huge amount of play. And there were some cards that were literally just super obviously nerfed. Gust of Wind got brought back as Pokemon Reversal, but there was a coin flip. Energy Removal got back as Energy Removal 2, but on a coin flip. And when we were playing these sets, we still had the Professor Elm card I mentioned. We still had the Muck card that turned off all Pokemon powers. We still had Cleffa. These were phenomenal cards. It's not the same, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately. It's really not the same. But bearing that in mind, there were some trainer cards here that did see a fair amount of play. Copycat was a phenomenal card because you got to shuffle your hand into your deck and draw a number of cards equal to your opponent's number of cards in their hand. Bearing in mind I've just mentioned how great Cleffa was. Yeah. So you just get a new hand of 7 cards. It was pretty good. Power Charge was a card that saw a fair amount of play as well. Power Charge let you flip a coin, and if heads, you shuffle 2 energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. Good for getting energy back. Dual Ball, this would not be the last time we saw Dual Ball. Dual Ball was a great card. You got to flip 2 coins, and for each head, you would search your deck for a basic Pokemon and pop it into your hand. Yeah, flipping double heads on Dual Ball was pretty over-the-top phenomenal. Though worth bearing in mind, you would not be able to get a baby Pokemon. Never mind. We also saw some play for Professor Oak's Research, and an alright supporter card here that let you shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 5 cards. Not as good as Professor Elm, but you were allowed to play other trainer cards after playing it, unlike Professor Elm. Outside of that, we did see a bit of play and a bit of love for Strength Charm, a Pokemon tool that you attach to a Pokemon, and when it did damage, you did 10 more damage. But then after you'd done that extra damage, you discarded Strength Charm. It was alright for doing a little bit of extra damage. It found its way into a few decks. Outside of that, Professor Elm's training method was alright, but didn't really go up against the other supporters we had at the time. You just got to search yourself out and evolve Pokemon. And Pokemon Nurse was alright. Remove all damage counters from one of your Pokemon, and then discard all energy cards attached to it, if any. Did see a little bit of play and a little bit of love. Now, in terms of Pokemon, there weren't really any from this set that seemed to make a big dent on the metagame. From the research that I was doing, none of these were great in the standard format at the time. But over on Jason Kozinski's wonderful blog, it's a great place for getting deck lists. It's one of the places I go for old deck lists. I'll link it in the description. It's great. You definitely should check it out. He's written a great piece about what would happen if we had ever had a format with just the e-reader sets onward. And this was planned, this was announced. Wizards did say, we are going to rotate to Expedition On. Unfortunately, Wizards never got a chance to do that because Pokemon took over the game. So we had a weird hybrid format where we had these along with the later cards like EX Ruby and Sapphire and the earlier Neo sets. And then we rotated to EX Ruby and Sapphire and got rid of all of these as well. If we had ever actually had that format, these are some of the Pokemon that would have been pretty gosh darned good. Clefable. Pokemon Power Moonlight. Once during your turn, you may put a card from your hand on top of your deck, and then search your deck for a basic energy, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. Just guarantees you get yourself an energy card. That's quite nice. Good for getting your energy. The aforementioned Charizard was quite good. 4 energy, 120 damage. Flip 2 coins. If one of them is tails, discard 2 energy cards attached to Charizard. If both of them are tails, discard all energy cards attached to Charizard. A very big and heavy hitting Pokemon at the time. We also would have seen a bit of love for Venusaur with its Harvest Bounty Poker Power. Once during your turn, if you attach an energy card from your hand to your active Pokemon, you may attach another energy card. quite nice. 4 energy, 40 damage plus paralysis on a coin flip was okay. And you'll notice here there's a lot of evolution Pokemon, because the format we were going to be heading into was one where most of the good basic Pokemon had gone away, and we were all going to slow it down, play with supporters, and go full evolution. No guarantee that's what was going to happen. We never got the format, but look at the cards, look at the card pool, and tell me if you disagree. Frankly, I don't. Ninetales would have been a fairly nice card there. 3 energy, all colourless. Discard all fire energy attached to Ninetales. Do 30 plus 20 more for each card discarded in this way. That's pretty big. Don't forget Charizard would have turned any energy on it into fire energy. Just putting that out there. Dragonite was a fun little Pokemon. The Pokepower Tailwind, if it's on your bench, you may reduce your active Pokemon's retreat cost to 0. That's quite nice. And then 1 lightning, 1 water, 1 fighting. Flip 2 coins, 40 damage for each heads. Nice attack, but kind of awkward. Machamp was a personal favourite of mine. Pokemon Power, once during your turn you may rearrange the top 4 cards of your deck. Great for consistency. And then 2 fighting, 2 colourless, 50 damage. Count the number of Pokemon you have in play with damage counters on them. Flip a coin. If heads, you do 50 plus 10 more damage for each of those Pokemon. And we're jumping ahead a little bit here, I apologise. But there was a Donphan that would have been really good with this. Years before Donphan Machamp was a thing, Donphan Machamp would have been a thing. One of my biggest lamentings in the Pokemon trading card game history is that this deck never really got a chance to shine. Vileplume would have been a fairly fun one here. Pokemon Power, flip a coin once during your turn. If heads, poison. And then 2 energy, 30 damage, flip 3 coins, 30 for each heads, but Vileplume itself then became confused. Alakazam, weirdly right, there were 3 e-reader sets, 2 of them had Alakazam in. The Pokepower Psy-Mimic, as a side note, trying to read the Pokemon powers on some of these cards was a nightmare. Once during your turn, instead of Alakazam's normal attack, you may choose one of your opponent's Pokemon's attacks, and you copy it, including energy cost and anything else that is needed. Or 1 Psychic, 2 colourless, 80 damage. If Alakazam and the defending Pokemon don't have the same number of energy cards attached to them, you only do 20. An awkward card to use, but a very fun one nonetheless. Gengar generally has good cards, and this one was kind of fun. The Pokepower Chaos move, once during your turn, if your opponent has 3 or fewer prizes, you may move 1 damage counter from one Pokemon to another, i.e. from one of yours to one of theirs. That's a fun Pokemon Power, or Pokepower as it was at that point. 2 Psychic, 1 colourless, 40 damage, and switch to the bench. It's an alright hit and run attack. And finally, that Typhlosion I mentioned earlier. No, it's not as good as a Blaziken from EX Ruby and Sapphire, and I'm not going to pretend for a second that it was. I am, however, going to say that it's better than a lot of the alternatives we would have had in an Expedition on format had TPCI not taken the game back over. Now, in terms of the best decks, again, we didn't really have any great decks made from Expedition in the standard format as it was, because they were generally beaten out by either the Neo sets or the EX sets. But there are 3 decks I do want to mention, just as a fun little side note, that we would have had in the format we should have had. Charizard, Venusaur, you probably figured out as we were going through. Charizard was a very fun one, because you did 120 damage, and you could use any energy you liked because you could turn it fire, but you discarded maybe 2, maybe 4 energy, so being able to then attach extra energy with Venusaur and then turn it fire with Charizard meant you could just keep hitting 120 turn after turn after turn. Yeah, that was pretty cool, ladies and gentlemen. That was a very fun one. Obviously, in that deck, Clefable was also brilliant for making sure that you always had enough energy in your hand. Gengar Dragonite would also have been a rather fun deck. We just talked about Gengar's amazing ability and its fairly nice attack. The problem is you had to move to the bench. So what you would do is you would whack a Blissey in the active. I know we've not got to Blissey yet, but look, it's got 120 HP as a stage 1 Pokemon, alright? That's pretty good. That's what you need to know for the time being. Also, it had a really nice Poké Power that healed. Once during your turn, choose one of your bench Pokemon and flip a coin. If heads, count the number of energy attached to Blissey, and then remove that many damage counters from the chosen bench Pokemon. Of course, Gengar would be on your bench, and then of course you would use Dragonite to free retreat, and you'd be off and rolling. That would have been a fun little deck. And then Typhlosion, Ninetales. Like we said, Typhlosion was quite nice for accelerating energy, not as good as some of the other cards we've seen, but doesn't matter, best we had. And then Ninetales did pretty good damage for fairly low energy. It was kind of fun, to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. It was kind of fun. So there you go. That was the Expedition base set, an extremely weird set, because it never really got time to shine, and it was part of a block of 3 sets that were pretty underpowered compared to what came before and what came after, which is a weird position to be in. Clearly it happened because Wizards of the Coast were trying to slow the game down and make it more evolution focused, and then TPCI came in and went, well, actually, and we're not going to be there for a few videos yet, but when we start looking at the EX era, you're going to see that TPCI actually did a really good job reinvigorating the game. As sad as it was for Wizards of the Coast, I think most people who played back then would agree, not sad that Wizards lost the license. Sorry, Wizards, I still love you. So yeah, I want to know what you think about the Expedition base set. I want to know your memories, I want to know your thoughts, I want to know anything you want to tell me, and I'd like you to go nuts, but I'd ask you to be nice. And then make sure you spam that like button. Seriously, click like. Show me that you appreciate these videos. Show me that I should keep doing them. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. And then make sure you follow me on Twitter @TheWossy, twitch.tv/PTCGRadio for some live action, and patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus pods, all that fun stuff. And do please consider checking out youtube.com/WossyPlays, where you can find out about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but are awesome. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.